Ebrahim Raisi, a hardline judge, secured a landslide victory in Iran's presidential election.
This is a killer. This guy is an unbelievable mass murderer. He has sanctions on him, and yet the Biden administration is going to be negotiating with him.
What does Joe Biden think of Raisi?
Well, of course, we vigorously object to the worldview and the outlook that Raisi has put forward. We don't share his values. We don't share his interests. But, Chris, we also have to keep our eye on the ball. The person who will call the shots on Iran's nuclear program is not Raisi. It's the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
This is someone who made sure in the 1980s to wipe out most political opponents. Political. Not violent.
He's got the blood of thousands of people on his hands. This is not someone we ought to be talking to. It's not a regime that we ought to be engaged with. We ought to continue the maximum pressure campaign and force this regime to change its behavior.
We are negotiating with somebody who is under sanctions restrictions from the United States. This is a real problem, and I think that what you're going to find is the Biden administration is going to be in a corner very soon.
The ultimate decision for whether or not to go back into the deal lies with Iran's supreme leader. And he was the same person before this election as he is after the election. So ultimately, it lies with him.
He said the Trump policy of extreme sanctions on Iran will only increase the chances of Iran getting a nuclear weapon. How in the world does he come up with that kind of logic?
These are people with blood on their hands of their own people. And we're trying to empower them on the world stage. We want to lift sanctions on them. We want to get more money flowing to that regime. The Biden team is trying to put us into this deal with the devil.
The Senate is expected to begin debating a bill that would enact some of the broadest voting rights reforms in a generation.
The For the People Act, this idea of basically it's a federal takeover, congressional takeover of the election process.
It is, in fact, in my opinion, a constitutional crisis in the making. It's a violation of Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. And what it amounts to, Jordan, is a desperate attempt by the Democrats to remain in power.
It doesn't have unanimous Democratic support among Senate Democrats. Not only Joe Manchin of West Virginia opposes it, but other Senate Democrats do as well, privately. They don't want to take the public heat for opposing it.
Everything from how voters are registered to how they go to the polls, to when they go to the polls, to how those votes are tabulated, to what they have to show when they go into a polling place to demonstrate they are, in fact, a legal voter. All of those mechanisms would move to the federal government, Jordan.
Where this really breaks down is you have one party, the Democratic Party, which supports a federal approach to voting laws and voting rights, overhauling and setting some standards at the federal level. You have another party, the Republican Party, which wants to do this at a state-by-state level, and those two things are incompatible.
Joe Manchin, why I'm voting against the For the People Act. Not only does he talk about why he's going to vote against the For the People Act 2 weeks ago, but he also says he would not support getting rid of the filibuster. Makes it very clear in that op-ed. But if you know enough about Joe Manchin's history, you know to read into even that title. He's giving the door to Chuck Schumer and Democrats to say, this is what you need to do for me to vote for the For the People Act.
Took him 10 days to walk away from what he wrote in the op-ed on the bill. How many days will it take him to walk away from the filibuster? As you suggest, Jordan, he's really already begun that walk away. The question is, how fast will he continue it, and how far will that walk away go?
Democrats say they will continue the fight over voting rights after Senate Republicans blocked their sweeping reform bill. A move to begin debate on the so-called For the People Act failed last night in a 50-50 party line vote. 60 votes were needed.
Last night ended in a filibuster. Didn't even really make it to the table. They said maybe it could come up later on.
This is the left, the ruling class, trying to create even more power to themselves. They don't want simple things like required to show an ID to vote. This isn't some fringe group within the Democrat Party. This is who they are, full stop. They are people who want the power to be in Washington, D.C. and not with the people.
50 Democratic senators voted in favor of advancing the For the People Act, including West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, whose support wasn't secured until late this afternoon, but it didn't matter.
I actually thought it was interesting to see 50 Republicans stand together last night, more so than it be not even a couple breaking off. The Democrats always have a good handle on their caucus, while I feel like the Republicans are the ones that typically have people breaking off.
Tonight, the president issued a statement that read in part, quote, "Unfortunately, a Democratic stand to protect our democracy met a solid Republican wall of opposition. It was the suppression of a bill to end voter suppression, another attack on voting rights that is sadly not unprecedented."
That entire mindset that they were just going to come in and just start changing things into the image of the left is now starting to hit reality, which is that if you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, your agenda is not going to move forward.
In general, the Democrats are coming to the realization that not just this, but any major sweeping change that they hoped would come about due to a Biden presidency, due to some change in the makeup, a lot of it is destined for failure.
Kamala Harris is going to finally see the border crisis firsthand tomorrow, 3 months after being tapped to lead the administration's response.
They are sending her to a part of the border that does not get as much action. It gets about half as much action, or even a little bit less than even half.
This issue with the southern border is Biden's border policy. They own this issue.
Nearly 100 days since being tasked with leading the White House response to the surge in illegal immigration on the southern border, the humanitarian crisis on our southern border. Nearly 1 million people have been encountered by Border Patrol.
This announcement about her trip, though, comes just days before former President Trump is slated to visit the Texas border next week.
Former President Trump announces he's going to go to the border with Greg Abbott and a number of congressmen, and he's going to make that visit on June 30th. Kamala Harris has been saying the entire time she's not going. Then all of a sudden on the 23rd of June, she shockingly announces, oh, I am going to go to the border, and I'm going to actually go there before President Trump goes, although she's going to a portion of the border that really is not the problem zone.
She is going because President Trump is going into the hotspot, going exactly where this crisis is, to highlight the fact that this border crisis is new.
She doesn't really fully comprehend the magnitude of the crisis and where it really exists on steroids, which is the Rio Grande Valley. She's nearly 100 days late and 1,000 miles short.
They talk about how they were going to be the compassionate group coming into office. They were going to be the ones with compassion. They have so much compassion that they still offering no solution to this problem, whether they keep their head in the sand or not. Where's the solution? That solution, apparently, at least politically, with this administration, does not exist.
The vice president boarded Air Force Two early this morning for the flight here to El Paso. She'll be on the ground for a couple of hours, and she'll be touring a Customs and Border Protection processing center.
She said, I was always planning to come here. This was always the plan. She was kind of defensive because in the question that was asked, you could hear, hey, was this all put together because former President Trump is coming next week?
How did you decide that right now was the right time to make your first trip to the border?
Well, it's not my first trip. I've been to the border many times because I've long said, I said back in March I was going to come to the border, so this is not a new plan.
She said some version of, look, this was always the plan. I was always going to go to Mexico and Guatemala first, and then I was going to come to the United States. Look, Jordan, the problem with that is it's backwards. It is the job of the American administration to start with the American interest and then work the problem from that perspective. They're doing it exactly backwards, and so of course you're going to get the results of all-time highs of encounters.
There was a major surge in migrants shortly after they took office. There have been more than 900,000 apprehensions at the border through May, and that's twice what there was last year.
It doesn't appear to be a particularly serious effort. It looks like she's going down there just to complete a task that's been on her to-do list for an awfully long time, and she caught flack for handling this poorly. For Vice President Harris to go down there and have some video taken of her at a processing center today, I can't imagine this is going to convince anyone thinking about coming across our border illegally to change their plan.
Instead of going there and talking to men and women dealing with that crisis and taking care of thousands of unaccompanied children, she picks El Paso because she does not want to see the devastation that her administration's policies have caused.
I hear them talk too, Jordan, about how our policies were bad. Well, look at what's happening to these people that are trying to make their way across. Look at the horrors that are being inflicted upon them by these cartels and these coyotes. This is truly a humanitarian crisis, wholly apart and separate from the crisis it presents to our southern border.